very specific discussion about drugs and alcohol on the gay scene. Does the gay scene have a huge problem with drugs? Yes, it does. Good night, thank you. Everyone go home. Let's be honest. No, it's an important discussion, and we're going to talk about, do we have a problem? What's going on? Why is it going on? Are we more susceptible? And who's taking what? And what we can do about it if there is a problem. Join them. Good night, thank you. No, I'm joking. It's going to be fun, and I've got a panel tonight of 3 exciting people and my good self. I'm Matthew Todd, I'm the editor of Attitude. I've written a little bit about drugs and mental health on the gay scene and writing some more about that and talking some more about that as the next year will come. So please welcome to the stage Stuart, who's a DJ and writer. The lovely landlord or landlady, as he said, of the RVT, Jason Dickie. It's like The Price is Right. How exciting. And the amazing David Stewart, who manages various drugs and alcohol services in London, specifically Antidote, which is the only drugs and alcohol service for gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender people in London. Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to put this down. I'm in your chair. That's all right. Oh. Right, I'm going to read you something that was in the Evening Standard to kick us off. I don't know if you read this. It was in the Evening Standard on the 28th of June, written by Ivan Massow. This was the day before Gay Pride. Hear a little rumbling there. Turn a few chairs over if you want to later. He said, I'm just not going to read you all of it. He said, "Am I the only one to notice that the gay scene today seems obsessed with drugs? Obsessed with sex, unable to take responsibility for its part in the spread of HIV, inhabiting a soulless and empty world of hedonism. In fact, as many thousands of people prepared to descend on central London this weekend, I'm finding it difficult to be proud. Every week, the number of kids who die while out clubbing or in South London apartments from drug overdoses or choking on GHB goes up. The clubs in Vauxhall have such severe drug issues that they now pay a levy to St Thomas's Hospital. Prosecutions are practically non-existent as the gay scene hides behind its new anti-discrimination laws and calls any such policing homophobic. Anyone who's tried dating someone who takes drugs regularly knows that during the week they're either missing in action or depressed and almost dead to the natural highs of real life and real relationships." That's me. Yes, it's even becoming fashionable to inject, or as they're calling it, slam. The comparatively innocent ecstasy pill of the early 90s has been replaced with crystal and methadone at so-called chill-outs, a euphemism for sex parties now principally responsible for the spread of HIV. Meanwhile, kids advertise BB only on gay pickup sites, treating HIV as an inconvenience that it's easier to get out of the way quickly. BB, bareback, means no condoms allowed. We, the gay community, are becoming a group of people who suddenly have everything and nothing all at once. Happy Pride. So, what do we think about that? Do we have a problem? Is there some truth in that? Is there a huge amount of truth in that? What's going on? David?
Well, first of all, there was an incorrect print there. I mean, he mentioned methadone, and I think he's referring to mephedrone, or I know he is. Do we have a problem? Yes. Because I work in a number of drug services targeted at gay men, and particularly doing this, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. We're having about 30 new people every week presenting with problems, and I'm wondering how many people aren't presenting.
What is Antidote, for people who don't know?
Antidote's the UK's only LGBT drug and alcohol service. So it used to be, about 10 years ago, it was set up originally, a couple of volunteers popping down to a bar and club to talk to the guys about ecstasy. Perhaps a bit of cocaine use at a dinner party or something like that. It's pretty innocent, pretty harmless. But in the last 5 or 6 years, it became almost exclusively about gay men having sex on drugs or going clubbing. So it's either sexual context or a clubbing context with much more harmful drugs. GBL, people are dying from in the saunas, overdosing regularly every single week and being taken to accident emergency. Most of them wake up feeling fine a couple of hours later after that coma, but some don't. And then there's crystal meth and mephedrone, which are being injected in larger amounts, usually in a sexual context, which can lead to psychosis and sort of chronic long-term depression if it continues. It's definitely a problem from my perspective. It's hard to get the data to support it. we have data, but we're a small charity, and of course people are coming to us. But when there are consequences like psychosis and sexual health, some of the monitoring in the drug services, some of the monitoring in the sexual health services aren't supporting it or not asking the right questions, so it's quite hard to prove it.
Some of this is being talked about at the moment, and I thought one of the scary things that Ivan mentioned was the possibility of a backlash. So this stuff is starting to be talked about more. There was an article in the Independent very recently that's reported in the media, in The Guardian as well. Why aren't there stats? Because that's the criticism from a lot of people. People are saying, oh, this is media kind of scaremongering. There isn't really a problem. It's just anecdotal. This is a few people. Why don't we have the stats?
The stats do exist in the smaller charities. If you're, let's say, 30 people, and this happened once, last bank holiday Easter weekend, for instance, 33 people showed up for PEP. PEP is the medicine that you would take if you've been exposed to HIV. If you take that medicine within 3 days, you can hopefully be protected from catching HIV. And 33 people showed up in one weekend asking for PEP. And that weekend I was there, so we were able to ask just anecdotally, was that a result of a chem sex weekend or having sex on drugs this weekend? And 32 out of the 33 said yes. But none of that was monitored. So if I wanted to go back at the end of the year to that sexual health clinic and say how many each weekend showing up for PEP we're using as a result of chem sex, they can't tell me. And it would think that the answer to that is quite simple. You just get them to record that data, but it's more complex because databases are connected to someone else's databases, which are connected to a big network of databases that go across the UK. And since this is a problem focused in London, it's quite hard to get that change. So standing and saying we should be asking this, some people who are less in the know say, yeah, but why? It's just a little bit of gossip from your little charity, isn't it? That's the challenge.
Okay. Jason, what's your experience of you are the landlady of the RVT, the centre of Vauxhall, and I think people tend to think of the Vauxhall Tavern as being less druggy. But what's your experience of working there? People coming in?
Right, I'd like to go back to an article, the bit that Ivan had said about the venues in Vauxhall paying a levy. I can only speak for my venue, and also we attend a lot of meetings. In the last 18 months, the police have and the health authorities have addressed these issues, and all the venues are working towards a better environment for the clients. I've come across customers who have came into the Vauxhall Tavern on drugs. It is a big issue in the area, but I think what we've got to remember is a lot of these people come into the Vauxhall under the influence of drugs because of the new restrictions in clubs that we have to do searches, proper searches, and it's tightened up a lot. So people are taking them in, but as a landlord, we are dealing with what people are doing on the outside coming in. And yeah, Bob, it has become a big problem in the Vauxhall area, but is that because we have the clubbing environment that allows people to go clubbing from the Friday through to the Monday?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, from my limited experience, I don't think people think of the RVT as being the problem place because it's where Dickie is and it's renowned for people drinking a lot. It's just a kind of boozer, isn't it? But obviously you're sensitive. No, but you're sensitive. Well, what's controversial about that? What's controversial about that? But you obviously have experience of that. You said that there is a problem in Vauxhall, so there is a problem. I mean, you see that. I mean, I hear stories of people like. Someone told me that they'd gone past the Vauxhall Cross, the roundabout, and there were like two guys like fucking at like 5 o'clock in the morning, just shagging on the thing. And there's lots of kind of people staggering around like zombies, walking around at 6 o'clock in the morning. I mean, so you think there is a problem?
There is, yeah. And I think it's a lot of it's to do with the younger generation, the ones that they really don't know what they're doing. They see it as let's get as high as we can, go off with their mates, and they don't know what they're taking, they forget what they've taken, and they end up on the street. And it looks bad for the general public when they see this in a small area of all these clubs going on. If you want me to name clubs, I'm not.
No, that's all right. I'm quite happy to name them, the ones I know about. Fine. Stuart.
Well, I think I just want to briefly return to Ivan's article in the Evening Standard, and his choosing that particular venue to kind of voice his concerns about the gay community. And I guess what I feel about that, while he may have points in there, what he's kind of left out, and I'm sure if he was here now, he would discuss this, but he didn't mention it in the article, is that he's someone who's recovering from drug and alcohol issues. So that gives you a certain perspective on things, and he didn't talk about that in the article. So to have had a piece of the cake and enjoyed it perhaps a bit too much, to the point where you had to seek help for it, and then to roundly criticise a bunch of people for doing much the same thing but being a bit younger and in different places, I think is a bit disingenuous. So that's my opinion on that. Whether there's a problem or not, and if it's the younger people will always be fearless. You know, I was when I was young, and I think younger people are maybe taking different drugs in different environments in different ways. But I don't think it's anything necessarily worse than the generation before. When you're young, you're fearless, and you will try anything, and you don't think about the consequences. Whether the drugs we have now are bringing greater consequences, I'm not so sure. Maybe we'll find out. But I think the young are just being young, you know, as I did when I was young. If drugs were offered to me, I didn't think, oh, I've got work the following day, how am I going to manage this? I was just delighted I was being offered them. I didn't think about the consequences. And that's what you're like when you're 22. You don't think about the consequences. Now, you know, I think about the consequences for everything, and I worry about it because I have wisdom a little bit. But, you know, but when you're young, you just want to party, you know. So people are perhaps using different drugs now, but it's much the same as everyone else when they were young.
Different drugs, it's not the same because they're different drugs. I think that's the critical thing.
Actually, I'm more happy. Is there someone with a microphone? Just because this is being signed and no one can hear it unless you've got a microphone. But let's hear what we've got to say. But let's just get a microphone over to you. This is no, it's fine. We're planning to take questions, but it's all good. It's free and easy here. Late 70s. Just that gentleman just there.
I just wanted to say that I think it is different precisely because they are different drugs. That is the difference, and I think that's one of the really important things that needs to be addressed, because the types of drugs that are around have different consequences from the types of drugs that were around when, you know, Stuart and I were taking drugs when we were younger.
Well, you know, I do acknowledge that, but you know what, that's what I'm saying. It's, you know, people are being young and carrying on as young people do, but because these drugs are so new, we don't know the long-term effects yet of how they're going to affect people in 20 years' time. That's something we don't know. We're scrabbling around with anecdotal evidence now of what these drugs will do as new ones arrive.
You're right, we don't know what they're going to do long-term. We know what they're doing short-term, and that's you stay awake for 3 days on a drug in the pursuit of sex, and the why for that, I think we're going to get into in a little bit, but there are lots of them doing it. Lots of us doing it, I'd like to say, actually, in the sense that we are a community. And the effects are, you get psychotic when you've been awake for 3 days. You believe that we have people turning up weekly saying that they were at a sex party where they were being judged and that they were being ridiculed and they were being teased, people were whispering about them, that they'd been locked into the house, that they were being filmed or they were being injected with unusual drugs. And then when they left the party, they were being followed home. When they went home to play on their computer, they were being watched through their webcam. And that's a normal part of the third day experience, which people share with each other and they learn to manage their own way. That's real. That is anecdotal. That's all recorded. We don't know what the long-term damage is, but that's enough. That's enough.
Mm. This sold lots of tickets, or people booked tickets for this very quickly. It filled up. So obviously, I imagine that quite a lot of you think there is a problem. Can you just put your hands up if you do think there is a problem and something serious is going on? And thank you. And also the same for people who adamantly think it's just sensationalism and there isn't a problem. Okay. You had your hand up. We've got a mic to this gent here just to see what he's got to say.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say, in the article, Ivan Masso admitted to taking drugs in the 90s, and he thought it was a more innocent time. But people have been taking drugs for millennia to escape the humdrum of daily life. And, you know, there was a lot of drug taken in the 60s. And you're talking about modern drugs. I mean, I first started taking drugs in the 80s, like speed and things. And I remember being in the Vauxhall Tavern in the 80s and smoking dope openly. I remember being in the Vauxhall Tavern in the 90s and scoring drugs in there, but, you know, no problem. Not on Dickie's night, but on Sundays. And, I mean, you've got drag queens in there who openly promote the taking of drugs, etc., etc. So it's a lifestyle choice for some people, and it's no worse than that in the 60s or maybe 100 years ago, or the opium dens, or...
Okay, thanks. David?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, we gay men, which I think we're focused on today mostly, have been are great drug takers and historically have been so. And you're right, I mean, there were gay men injecting speed and perhaps methamphetamine in the late 60s in the bathhouses in San Francisco and LA, and it was beginning to become a huge problem. What happened was suddenly the AIDS epidemic hit, and that injecting of drugs and the sexual context in which they were being used were contributing to the AIDS epidemic at the time. The bathhouses were shut down. Money was pumped into the gay community. Messages were pumped to the gay community, and we were really excellent at taking those on board and adopting condom use and doing all this. We were really good at addressing these things. Pre the AIDS epidemic, the harms associated with these drugs were just maybe guys feeling a bit twatted at home on a Monday morning and not being able to cope. Now the harms are these increased HIV diagnoses from the sexual context, from the increased injecting use. Now there is GHB, GBL, where people are dying from overdoses in saunas. They're turning up in accident emergency 3 a week. These are new drugs, and they are more harmful than the older drugs. Whether it's a problem or not is why we're here. I believe it to be. But we've got to wait for the data, I guess.
Stuart, we were talking about this earlier on about, you know, the difference between what people were taking in the 90s and what people are taking now. Do you want to just say a word about
that? Well, you know, it's really hard. You don't want to sound like some old windbag, you know, and kind of like, you know, but, you know, when I was kind of in full effect in the 90s, a lot of people were taking ecstasy, and that was kind of in all the clubs then, and it just felt everyone was on the same drug, and it felt like people were being social, and it was intimate and nice. Obviously, there were wrong nights, and, you know, it wasn't all lovey-dovey, but there was a lot of that about, and it felt like people were kind of unified, you know. I was there on the kind of the beginnings of the rave scene as well, not so much on the gay scene, but with the M25 circuit raves and stuff, and there was all that kind of unity, and we've got a movement. Which there isn't now. It's very disparate, and it feels to me that people kind of aren't so much of trying to get in the same vibe as everyone else. It's just to individually go into yourself and get as messed up as you can. That seems to be kind of like a lot of what happens in the clubs. And I think there's also kind of a difference now, I guess, with these kind of modern drugs that are coming about now and the kind of the use of smartphones and social media. And I think it's a new thing. I think the combination of an amphetamine, that could be cocaine, speed, methadone, crystal meth, those things with kind of cruising apps, you know, and you could say other social media as well, I think presents a completely new plateau, a new place that we don't know the effects of yet. And I think it's almost like people become lab rats. You know, when you hear about the rats that when they press a button they get a bit of cocaine and they'll just keep going until they die. I think those things when you combine amphetamines with those apps, which is like you're constantly looking for a message and looking for approval, you become like the rat pressing that button. And you combine that with some kind of amphetamine, and you've got days of doing that. And it's bizarrely kind of satisfying on a really mediumly miserable level for the person who's doing it. You can't quite stop it. It's not exactly fun, but it's keeping you busy. And there's a lot of that. It's kind of, you know, and you think, oh, God, I just wasted 3 days doing that. That's really terrible. The next weekend it happens again. And I think this is a new kind of milieu. I think, you know, it's quite possible that it does something to your brain chemistry. You know, there's dopamine involved there, and looking for the message. It's not about the sex. It doesn't even become about the sex. It's about the chase. You know, I've seen sex parties where everybody's sat on their phone. They're trying to get more people there, and everybody is. You know, it's become about the chase, and it's the rat pressing the button, and it's these cruising apps, you know, and that's what's going on. I don't know where that's going to go. I don't know if we can do anything about it. I think it's happening on a wider scale with teenagers going into chat rooms and getting bullied. It's similar stuff. I think it's happening everywhere. I mean, we've got our own special thing that's connected to sex, but the way we interact with social media and all that stuff and how it's kind of wiring our brains is something we don't really know the effect of yet.
David, can you explain that, our own special thing connected to sex? Can you explain why these drugs are so kind of, you know, happening when people are having sex? Why that's a problem?
I get that question, do I? Okay, no, I can't, but I'll try. Okay, intimacy is something, if we're talking about people using drugs for sex is nothing new, as you were saying. Crystal meth is huge around the world, and the straight men are not using it compulsively for sex the way we gay men are. Why? And I'm wondering if we have a complicated relationship to our sexuality, which may be born out of a history of sex being the naughty sex, the diseased sex, the sex that happens at Hampstead Heath and in cottages and behind doors under railway arches, as opposed to just, you know, it's just sex. And if it comes down to intimacy, which, and this is just born out of my experience of working with people, so I'm scared you're all going to attack me. But intimacy is something we learn, human beings, as children. It's in the family unit. There's no such thing as a perfect family unit, I know, but the perfect family unit would be a place where you go and where you feel safe and where you're loved and where you're accepted. Your hair doesn't have to be perfect. You argue with your siblings, but you're loved and accepted. That's intimacy. A lot of gay men don't get that because they're pretending to be straight, worrying about being discovered for being gay, pretending to be straight so they don't get bullied at school, worried they're going to be rejected or found out by their family. That's the opposite of intimacy, the exact opposite. And so how do we expect these men to grow up and incorporate intimacy into their sex lives and their romantic lives when there's absolutely no frame of reference for it? And I think that's connected to why that, in combination, as Stuart said, with these apps, sex is now something that is just so available, and everything's just a click away, and it's just a click away, and it's a click away. I would love an app that says, where somebody could say on an app, I'm looking for a hug and sex, or to get to know somebody. I might not want to marry you, but there is intimacy involved, and there's fear of being rejected in that moment, or of feeling a bit fat, or my dick not being big enough, or whatever. But it's all, I will give you porn star sex right now within 30 seconds of coming to my door, please be ready for it, and deliver porn star sex. And that's just too much. And if you say you're a bit vulnerable in your profile, then you're going to get rejected or get told you're on the wrong site or butch up, dude, or whatever. We don't like rejection. And so just take drugs and get it done and have a great time-ish. That's my explanation.
I'm glad you didn't get bullied for that. There's a guy at the back who had his hand up.
Just going to say that I think it's the apps, the drugs, but also the Viagra, because I think if everyone was sat in a circle high all weekend with floppy dicks, they'd not want to do it again so much. But if you have the Viagra and the drugs and you find the right people, you really do have an incredible time. It might be one incredible hour in a whole weekend of madness, but it sticks in your memory and you find yourself looking for it again. And I don't think it has very much to do with chemical addiction, because there's a lot of people doing it once every month, once every 2 months, but they will eventually come back to wanting that great hour again.
I think, yeah, all drugs are about chasing that perfect, they say drugs are about chasing that first high, but it can also be about chasing that perfect hour, as you say. And polydrug use, yeah, there's not a person just using crystal meth, they're using crystal meth with G. G does give you a hard-on. I think it's the only drug on the planet that gives you a hard-on just like that. But yeah, polydrug use incorporating Viagra, absolutely. I think most dealers these days will give you a bag of crystal, a DVD porn, Viagra, and a Valium to take home with you to end the evening.
Now that's what I call a service.
So we talk about these chill-out parties. Now, from what I understand, the clubs that go on all weekend or go on till 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever in the morning, and then people want to carry on partying, so they will invite people back to their house or to a hotel or whatever it may be, to their flat. Lots of people come back and people sit around in their shorts and they start having sex, start taking drugs, and there is talk of that being, these occasions being where HIV is being transmitted because people aren't using condoms when they're having sex because they're so high. What do you say about that, David? It's happening, isn't it? I think it's definitely happening, but...
It's happening.
How?
Sex is so confusing for gay men these days. What's safe and what's not? Always use a condom, always use a condom. It was a brilliant message 30 years ago, but now, you know, people have undetectable viral loads, and it's really hard to transmit, to pass that virus on if you take your medicine every day. Some people lie about that, some people don't. Lots of people do. You know, the fact that BBRT and bareback sites exist is testament to the fact that people want to have unsafe sex. Whether we want to respect their opinion or not, or their choice is up to you, but we hope that's an informed choice. It's just really confusing, but in the grip, crystal meth, mephedrone, perhaps both of those more than G, are incredible disinhibitors. You know, they're not dissociatives, they're disinhibitors. When you're on that high, it's an incredibly powerful high. You want to shag anything. You're invulnerable, you're a superhero, nothing can affect you. Any fear that you might have normally, any fear about disease or about tomorrow or about missing work, I'm invulnerable, I can do anything. And the consequences come later on when you're sober up. And everything's so horny on these drugs too. You will shag that and that and that, and that microphone's looking awesome, by the way. You know, everything is attractive. You'll sit on anything on crystal meth, and if it's a disease you're sitting on, what the hey? That can be interpreted as sexy.
From what I understand, that now they're becoming so popular that people are sometimes skipping the clubs and they're just organising kind of chill-outs and things. Do you have any experience of that, Jason? I mean, personally, if you want to talk about it or not, or just of hearing that stuff going on? Because obviously people meet up in the RVT.
Yeah, no, I know people who meet up. You see it quite a lot. People meet up for a get-together, and then they'll go, rather than going onto a club, they'll order their drugs from dealers. And the trouble is, those dealers are available 24 hours a day. So when you're talking about the apps that you can get people around and things like that, if people come and they've got no drugs, then it's quite easy just to contact your dealer and get another batch of drugs over. And that, I think that is the big trouble, especially with crystal meth. People are having crystal meth parties at home and skipping the clubs because they don't want to go clubbing. They don't want to dance. When you're on crystal meth, it's just, as David was saying, sex, sex, sex.
Traditionally, the THT has kind of suggested they didn't think that there was a problem with crystal meth in the UK. But do you see it around?
Right. It's quite interesting because there's an article that the BBC done last week on that UK does not have a crystal meth problem.
Yeah, I saw
Unfortunately, in London, a very dear friend of mine is now going through rehab because of crystal meth, so I've got to know a lot about it. And talking to him, I'm actually surprised at the long-term users that are on it as well. So that article, I don't know where they got it from, David. I don't know if you can...
Sorry, can I just...
We've got
wait for the microphone.
mic for this gent. Thank you.
Yeah, I was talking to a lecturer of mine who also said there was no crystal meth problem in the UK, or very low problem. And I spoke to him about it, and he said he was actually comparing it to other countries, and he was from Australia. And he said at one point in Australia, the two teaching hospitals there were seeing 2 cases of methamphetamine-induced psychosis a day, and that the meth there was cheaper than cannabis. So I think he was talking relative to the rest of to the countries. And I thought, actually, yeah, no, that does make sense, because I said to him, I said, no, you've just got to go to Vauxhall, and actually you can see it everywhere. And he said, yeah, but I mean, another thing he said was the people who do it in Vauxhall, they tend to have full-time jobs, and they can kind of, in a way, regulate their use, and so they don't get noticed by the media. And I suppose this might be another reason why it's not researched as much. They're not a problematic population, and so the funding isn't there to actually look at the problem, and it gets just swept away and hidden away.
I think one of the problems is when it comes to like people who are HIV that go to their clinics, or you don't see it with crystal meth. You don't see people collapsing, getting taken to hospital in ambulances. So there's no way of monitoring that. But another friend of mine who done a research at Chelsea and Westminster and done a questionnaire for HIV people, he was actually quite surprised of actually how many people actually use crystal meth. But there's no way of sort of monitoring because they don't collapse. And that is the trouble, and maybe that's what the NHS needs to, or the doctors need to start doing, is finding a way of finding how we can find out who's on crystal meth. Yes, there are people that can take it once a month, once every 2 months and have that hour of sex and then hold a full-time job down on a Monday. But it's the other ones that we need to look at, and there must be a way of monitoring this.
I think one of the problems is with crystal meth, we're not sure of the numbers of the people that use it, but treating the people who have become addicted to crystal meth is a real difficulty. Of all the amphetamines and of all the drugs that have been around, kind of what it does kind of to your neural pathways in the brain is quite beyond anything that has ever come about before, in that it fries the synapses that make you enjoy basic things in life. So that rush of pleasure you get when you have a cup of tea or you get home from work or you have some nice sex, that rush of pleasure, crystal meth burns out those synapses. So the daily things that you would normally get pleasure from, you can't anymore. And the addiction is so severe that kind of people who are treating crystal meth addicts, they have to have 5 years completely clear from going anywhere near the drug before their brain stands any chance of them recovering and getting over the addiction. So, as a cost issue to treat these people, before they present, and people normally present when they've lost everything, when they've lost their jobs, when they've lost their houses, their friends, it's, like, any drug addict. They're quite good at hiding it for a long time, and then people lose everything, and that's when they turn up to see David, I guess. So it's a very difficult thing to monitor and would be very expensive to treat.
I have to agree. And the drugs by most governments are defined in 2 different categories. There's problematic drug use and problematic drugs and recreational drugs. Recreational drugs are your ecstasy and your marijuana and your MDMA and things like that. And then there's your problematic drugs, which are simply alcohol, heroin and crack. And so traditionally, drug services really only focus on the really problematic ones, which are heroin and crack, until lately, because these 3 drugs, which aren't GHB, GBL, mephedrone and crystal meth, they really are problematic drugs. And you've seen the pictures in America where it's used outside the gay communities around the world, around the Western world anyway. Crystal meth is used kind of the same way that crack cocaine is. It's about poverty, it's about your council estate, it's about homelessness and crime. That hasn't taken off, as you were saying, in the UK yet, and there's the complicated reasons why, but it hasn't, which is a good thing. But it has taken off in all the gay communities around the Western world in a really large way. And that's not about poverty, that's not about homelessness, that's not about crime. Again, as you were saying, these people have jobs and they have access to the human resources departments. So, I mean, if a person using heroin or crack starts using, let's say today I use heroin or crack, within a month I'm going to be needing some help. I'm going to be accessing my local drug service for help because it's that tough. Crystal meth is that bad too, but it takes about 6 years for a person from the time they start using crystal meth to the time they need accessing treatment, because it can be a functional drug. It's not physically addictive like heroin is, so you can put it down after your 4-day bender and you crash, you wake up, never touching that stuff again until next weekend. When you can't get out of bed because you're so exhausted, you can do a small pipe and get to the gym to keep your gym body up, get to work. And so that keeps it functional. So it takes a long time for people using crystal meth to get into services. So your issue about how do we find out it's happening and how do we address it is quite hard, because we're seeing the beginnings of a really alarming trend within our gay community. And it's not about poverty, it's not about crime, and they're not going to be accessing services until it gets really bad, which is what we're just starting to see now.
Can you explain to people what slamming is and whether or not it's a big problem and what's going on there?
Sure. LGBT people historically have not done heroin or crack. They've not been accessing the services. They've always done the recreational drugs. They've danced in nightclubs and hugged their friends for too long, and that's about as it got. They've not been homeless. Less than 2% of LGBT people are usually homeless or using those kinds of drugs. It's been a lot of fun until recently, until these drugs came about. LGBT people have not historically injected drugs too. Perhaps trans people more than LGB, but they've not injected drugs. That helps add to that sort of, we've been the safe, fun drug users until recently. Crystal meth is so much better when you inject it. It's cheaper, it's faster, and it gives you a better high, and it lasts longer. There's so many reasons why you would graduate to injecting. But of course, imagine a community of heterosexual injecting drug users who are in and out of treatment. That's an addictive drug. You get to your drug service within a month of starting to use. So you're exposed to messages of clean injecting equipment, safer injecting information. You're just exposed to it. It's a normal part of your life. But these gay men haven't traditionally been doing this. Suddenly they're injecting, and they don't have that culture of knowing where to get clean needles. Where do they get clean needles? They have to go to where those heroin users are, those junkies, to get their needles. They don't want to. So they're buying it online. They're not getting exposed to the safer injecting information. HIV, hepatitis C are on the rise. We're still trying to get the data on that because, again, the sexual health clinics aren't asking the right questions about whether it's done in a drug use context.
But then go back to that, David. Why do gay men who work out at the gym can quite happily go into a clinic and get the needles for their steroids, but won't go into a clinic to get the needles for slamming?
Well, it's true. They're not. That's another problem. They're not going to the heroin clinics to get their steroid needles either. Steroid use has been around a little bit longer than, and straight people inject steroids too, which is a good thing for the gay men in the sense that some drug services have a special evening where you can go and pick up your where you can pick up your steroid injecting equipment without having to run into the junkies, the heroin junkies. Forgive me, I don't like that word. And of course, as Stuart was saying, this is an online thing too. Some of these drugs you buy online, some of these drugs you get. You don't go down to the street corner to score. You go online to find a sex party. So you also go online to buy your needles. And of course, when you go online and have your needles delivered, really cheaply, by the way, it doesn't come with safer injecting information. And so we've got people who think that they might be using different needles, but they're using the same pot to share it in, or they're pulling the water out of the same container. Hepatitis C, HIV. It's a mess. It's a disease mess.
Obviously, this is all really private and confidential. We're all talking about personal things, but who here has either used crystal meth or is aware of it in their circle of friends? Is anyone just out of interest to see? Well, considering the THT thing, that it's not happening, that's quite a lot of people, isn't it? And what about G? Okay, so just like marginally more. The club drug clinic, Chelsea and Westminster, isn't it? From what I understand, I went there to see those guys, of which you work very closely with them, and they're doing an amazing job. From what I understand, they had the HIV and AIDS clinic. They came to the drugs people there and said, "We've got a bit of a problem. There's positive men who were doing really, really well, and suddenly are not taking their medication. And their T cells are affected, and they're not doing very well. And it seems to be because they're taking drugs and going on these kind of 4-day benders." And so they came to the drugs people, told them that, and they said, "Okay, well, we'll maybe set up this clinic for club drugs," thinking that it would be 80% students, and it's 80% gay men, or sometimes 90% gay men coming to those services. So what's going on there, and what work is happening there?
The club drug clinic, as you say, it was originally set up because who remembers reading about Meow Meow and legal highs in the Daily Mail, and of that lovely mother and daughter who were at a funeral and took the GHB and somebody died? I mean, there's all this press around about legal highs and drugs. And so the club drug clinic was set up to address this heterosexual phenomenon of students taking drugs. It's not just about those homeless guys from the estate doing heroin. It's a whole new thing, and it was the buzzword. So club drug clinic was set up to address that. And I think very, very few people were coming using those legal highs, very, very few. And what was missing is because GBL is so dangerous, because crystal meth is so dangerous, and because most drug services weren't catering for them. I mean, imagine going to your straight drug service and sitting in front of a heroin worker and saying, "I got fisted for 3 days on crystal and I'm going to do it next weekend too. Can you help me, please?" They're terrified. They're really terrified, and they're not equipped to handle it. Some of them weren't even funded to do the detoxes. So the club drug clinic was set up to address that. Very quickly, we realized it was not about students doing legal highs. It is, and we're keeping an eye on it, but yeah, it's 75% plus are gay men using these 3 drugs we're talking about. And you mentioned the sexual health. It's nearly always in a sexual context. And we also realised that sitting in a drug service waiting for someone to go, I've decided that these drugs are bad for me and I'm going to have to make a change, I'm going to go to a drug service. That's just too lazy. It's too lazy. We can't wait for that. We're considering this is a syndemic, an epidemic. So we reached out to sexual health services. If you are using drugs in a sexual context, you're probably going to get gonorrhea. You're probably going to need PEP. You're going to need to go to your sexual health clinic. You might not be ready to address your drug use, but you're going to be there. So doing the right kind of interventions and being able to speak to people there, not in a judgmental way, but just sort of saying, are you enjoying the drugs? When did you last have sober sex? Are you having a good time? When was the last time somebody stayed over and hugged you to sleep? And these guys go, oh my God, I'm not sort of getting any of that. And Grindr doesn't let me get that. I can't say that I want those things for fear of rejection. And so doing those kind of interventions in a sexual health clinic means we can intervene earlier, hopefully, and provide some care and guidance before it gets too bad.
Grindr, that was interesting. How much of a problem do you think these apps are? I mean, obviously they're great in lots of ways because, we can find each other, talk to each other, make friends. But from what I understand, that in the past, maybe a certain group of people who might be behaving in, with taking a certain type of drug in that place, are now suddenly mixing with these people over here, and they wouldn't traditionally necessarily have met. Maybe they would at a bar once in a blue moon, but actually now it's all over the place. So
I'm so glad I don't have to go to Hampstead Heath to find a shag anymore. That's brilliant. I'm glad I don't have to find some dodgy place under a railway arch, painted black walls to have sex. I can go on Grindr and I can do these things. That's great. And I know that we gay men have fought for the right to have a different kind of sex, and we've got it. Yay. But I think it needs to be measured a little bit. And I'm sorry to say, this is not qualified or quantified research, but just let's say a 15-year-old ticks the box that he's of age and signs on to Grindr. It's possible that within 4 conversations, that 15-year-old is going to be offered chems for sex. And we estimated that within 8 conversations of first logging on, he's going to be offered to slam drugs. Do I need to say any more? That's outrageous.
I just want to take a question from this lady over here who had her arm up.
Hi. My name's Catherine.
Catherine.
I wanted to ask for panel's views on issues about sexual assault that happens in this kind of context. I work at Gallup, which we offer a service for LGBT people around sexual assault, which I think is probably the only one, certainly in London. I don't know about other places. And we're seeing an increasing number of guys that come having experienced something they didn't consent to, quite often where they're unconscious or at least not able to properly consent, and it's just seen as a bit part of the deal, really. And I just want to know your views, because I think it's quite a complex thing to address. And I know that a lot of people just feel like it's just something that you put up with, that something might happen to you, you might wake up, something's happened, but it's just part of being at that party or whatever. And it does worry me, especially for younger people, especially younger gay men that are getting that message, that actually it's okay for anybody to do anything to you without your consent. And I think it's quite tricky how we kind of handle this. So I know we've got a few sort of things on the go, David and I are working together on about it.
We do.
Yeah. I'd like to just know your views and comments about that
I've got
subject.
a lot to say about that, and I will. I just think that you guys probably know a little about this too.
I would say, that reporting any sexual assault, is difficult. We know it's talked about much in the media how difficult it is for women because they fear they won't be listened to. I think there are a whole bunch of other issues for men in those contexts. It's because, men feel, it doesn't matter whether you're a gay man or a straight man, but if you couldn't handle a sexual situation, what were you doing? That's, which is what a woman will think too. But it's somehow, there's a different kind of culture attached to sexual assaults on men. And I think within these contexts that happen at these sex parties, that there's a whole load of factors that go on, which is often that people want to fit in. This could be a bunch of seemingly hot, attractive guys that you want to hang out with and you want their approval. So as you go into a situation, and you might be younger, you might be the same age, you could be older, I don't know. You go into that situation and you want to fit in. You know, so when a behavior starts happening that's a little bit outside of your boundaries, rather than say, okay, guys, I'm not going to slam crystal meth or I'm not going to have bareback sex, you just kind of quietly squash that voice and kind of get on with it because you don't want to seem like the party pooper. And I think that happens a lot over the weekends with a lot of people. And I think within that context, things happen where there are, you know, without wanting to quote Robin Thicke, because that's kind of revolting now when I think about it, but there are blurred lines. You know, where, you know, it's you're kind of consenting to behavior, you're off your face. If you were sober, you would definitely not do it, you know, but kind of like, you know, often these situations are about getting so high that you don't think about the consequences. It's about breaking down all those barriers that say don't have bareback sex, don't have sex with lots of people, don't have sex for more than an hour. All those things, you know, those voices, which is what, you know, society tells you should do. Taking drugs shuts those voices down until you become just a sexual being. And it's in those contexts that risky sex happens. You know, and whether that, you know, amounts to sexual abuse, whether that is a form of self-abuse, self-harm, it's hard to tell, you know, but I'm sure that there are situations when people pass out where those things can occur. You know, but that's very difficult. You know, if you went round to somebody's house and you accepted free drugs off someone, you know, and you took their hospitality and you went over there and walked around in a jockstrap, it's very hard to then turn around and say, well, I was assaulted. Because you feel that in many ways you kind of signed up for it. You jumped in a cab at 7 a.m. after getting a message on Grindr and went there. That doesn't sound like a kind of vulnerable person. So that reporting that kind of event is very, very difficult under those circumstances. And also a faith in a police force that isn't going to laugh you out the door. I went to a sex party and there were 9 people there and we took loads of drugs and I think I may have been assaulted. That's a hard one to go to the desk with.
Jason, have you got any experience?
I mean, I think Stuart said it all. Really, I think when you go to a sex party, for a lot of people, doesn't that give consent that you're getting involved in it? You're taking the drugs, and these people at these parties. I mean, if I was at a party and there was 9 of us taking drugs, and somebody was a bit messy, well, do you know what I mean? So what would I do in that situation? If I'm high as well. You can get yourself into such a tricky situation that you could be having sex with a bloke and he passes out, wakes up, and he hasn't said no, but you've not actually sort of worried about what state he's in because you're in the same state as well. That's what worries me sometimes when it comes to sexual assault, is we got a lot, you know, there's a lot of young blokes that Stuart says goes out for the weekend. All of a sudden they wake up on a Monday, they're on a come down and they're, oh shit, I'm going to go back to my boyfriend, I've disappeared for 4 days, and they cry sexual assault. That is the big worrying thing when you said it comes to sexual assault, but it's like that in rape as well.
This is where I can see your hand up, Peter. We'll come up.
We'll come to it in a minute, yeah.
Where the drugs get differentiated. Crystal meth and methadone are very alert, hyper alert, in fact, kind of drugs. GHB, GBL is one of those drugs where when you've taken a little too much, hands up people who've seen people pass out on G. Okay.
Wow.
They look horny, right? They are not necessarily conscious, but they look horny. They're collapsing. No,
not always. It can be very unattractive. Very, very unattractive.
They can also look like they're up for it.
Yeah.
But that's not consent. And so there are people that are sort of, they're really high, but their eyes are closed, and they don't know who is in the sauna cubicle with them or at the sex party. And, you know, at that moment when you come to and there's 4 guys around you and, ow, my ass hurts. Or you wake up alone in a sauna cubicle. And Catherine from Gallup, yes, we have been working on this stuff together, and you've got some great campaigns and where they're based on asking, not so much, having a young or any age guy sitting in front of me going, yeah, but I kind of asked for it. It's just a normal part of my weekend. Yikes. And so the campaigns that we're working on are less, what about asking us to look after our gay brothers, to be aware that if someone's a little too high, don't go there. You know, don't shag him. And coming from that perspective, and what I love about your work around this, Catherine, is asking for a little bit of cohesion as a community to look after each other. because we are offering 15-year-olds on Grindr, do you want to slam with me? And we are shagging people who are too high to really make a conscious decision about whether they want to use a condom or not. And so the campaigns are really asking for some community brotherhood, I think.
We'll talk about community stuff in just a second. I'm going to bring in Peter Wilson, who's a very young DJ, and he's very opinionated about what he's seeing around him. So, Peter, you've got the mic, haven't you?
Yeah, I was just going to say 2 points about the kind of sexual assault thing. Kind of the first thing is my experience when I was going to chill outs and those kind of things, where I've probably been to over like 100 over the last 2 years. I just was going out 3 times a week, and I was always very clear that I didn't want to have unprotected sex, and that I rub people the wrong way because I always like to stay in control because I'm diabetic. I have to be very careful with kind of my drug taking, so I would never overdose or I've never passed out or anything. But one of the things I found was how hostile people were towards me, and I've often, on several occasions, left like crying because I've been kind of bullied and kind of told that I was being judgmental just because I didn't want to have unprotected sex or because I didn't kind of want to join in. Like, I often used to say before I was invited, I'd say, like, I can't kind of say before I go and meet a load of people or strangers that I definitely want to have sex with all of them. Like, it's just, for me, I find that kind of a bit ridiculous. So, like, I always used to kind of say the difference between a chill out and a sex party is that a sex party, everyone is having sex. A chill out, it's kind of the options there. But I was just saying that kind of hostility and kind of people were very aggressive towards me. And I've even had people kind of try and spike me and force me to take G because they kind of wanted to. Like, it would be rape because I kind of made it clear that I didn't want to be kind of fucked or anything, and it's like people had that lack of respect and that lack of kind of like just I didn't like throw it in people's faces. It's just, people kind of tried it on. I made it clear, and yeah, you could say I shouldn't have been there, but I always made sure before I went to these kind of places, I kind of tried and felt out and see, and it was kind of futile, I must admit. Like, that's why I kind of stopped in the end because there's no point because I just ended up in a kind of state at the end of it because everyone was annoyed at me because I didn't want to kind of get in a gangbang or something. But I think the other point I was going to say is about my experience when I've been to saunas. Like, when I think about sexual assault, how easy it is to happen there. Like, I met a guy who was diabetic and we kind of platonically bonded over it and we were talking about it. And then he took 10 mils of G and he was like, I'll be fine. And I was like, right, are you sure? And I was like, no, yeah, I'll be fine. And then 20 minutes later, we kind of been talking in the cubicle. He's passed out. I've just met him, but if I left him, the door's open, you can't lock it from the outside, and anybody could walk in. So I'd spend like 4 hours kind of waiting with him, going and get water. I didn't really want to kind of get staff out or anything because, I've dealt with people passed out on G so often that I just, I didn't want them to get like thrown out or anything. So it's that kind of, there is that massive danger, I think, at kind of saunas and stuff like that where, I think if you're going to be taken to, you should be responsible and be with somebody else. I mean, if they're on it as well, it's still risky, but it's like, is it worth the risk of passing out in a cubicle with the door open? I just think that's incredibly dangerous, really.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah.
It's all right. No, it's really helpful. I heard a story recently of a young guy, this week actually, who was last weekend, I believe, we heard it, didn't we, this week, a guy who was in a back room and pulled out a condom and wanted to put a condom on, or wanted the person who was about to have sex with him to put a condom on, and 3 or 4 guys started spitting at him because he wanted to wear a condom. And so the next part, I just want to talk about, do you think we have a problem culturally? Is something going wrong? Is it not just about the drugs? Because I think we do have a problem, and I think there's something about our experience which is driving us to make mistakes, to do silly things, to take risks, to be self-sabotaging. I know I have done in my life and had a hard time growing up gay, not had anyone to talk to about it, and maybe drank too much. Drugs were never really my thing. I mean, I took speed and cocaine in my mid-20s at GAY. It was really tough. But on the whole, it wasn't really a problem for me. But drinking was, and going to saunas a lot, and it's not a moral thing because I went to lots of saunas and always felt shit being there, always felt shit about the people there, always felt shit about myself afterwards. So do we have a problem generally? And I think we do, and I think we see it all over the world, gay communities all over the world. Sydney, there's a massive problem with crystal. It happens in New York, LA, it's happening all over the place. What are your views on that, David?
As a gay community, do we have a problem?
Mm.
I think in some cases, yeah. That's the sort of thing that gets you in a lot of trouble if you agree with, because we fought hard for decades longer than that, I guess, to enjoy a different kind of sex, to differ from the heteronorm. But it's always changing. It's not like you get there and then you're there. The new things is well, porn is a normal way. Is how we learn about sex. There was some colleagues of mine who were studying pornography. Remember that guy who watched the Batman film and then went and shot everyone in the Batman film with a Batman hood on? You know, does watching a film cause behaviour? And they were trying to figure out, does bareback condomless pornography cause that kind of behaviour? I don't know. But they did do a survey where young people were asked, why are you watching porn? And it was the right environment for them to give an honest answer, like, you know, we're expecting to, you know, have a wank or to get off. And most of the answers were to learn what gay men do together. I mean, that's not just a gay problem. Pornography inappropriate images get turned up on Facebook here and there, and we've got to deal with that. And with all of that knowledge and that education, you don't see pornography which teaches you about how to incorporate intimacy into sex. How do we learn that? We don't see it modelled in our parents, and we don't see it a lot in general TV. So we've got to learn it somehow.
Well, I think that's the difference, isn't it? That if you're gay, you put gay into Google and it's porn, and the gay magazines are full of sex, including Attitude, all of them. Whereas there aren't many representations of intimacy or couples or relationships, and you know, kind of here in these kind of environments, we're all very like, yes, we're standing up for rights, but out on, and we're very PC and we all like each other. But when you go out into the gay scene, you hear gay men slagging each other off all the time. You hear people saying, I heard someone the other day, I'm a homophobic gay man, I hate these fucking gays. There's a lot of that goes on. It doesn't seem to me that we're particularly happy with one another a lot of the time, and it's not surprising considering all the crap we have to go through. Jason, what's your thoughts on that, running a big, busy gay pub?
Well, going back to the what you said earlier about the there's groups like the gay bullying within itself. Like you've got the twink group, you've got the Muscle Mary group, you've got this group, you've got the leather group, you've got the other group, and none of these groups seem to just want to get on anymore. So like you won't get the Muscle Marys with the twinks, then you've got the Muscle Marys slagging the twinks off, and then the twinks slagging the older generation off, which I'm part of. That, you know what I mean? That sort of thing. So when if the whole community just work together, I mean, like you said, you've got your certain bars, you've got the GAY bar, you've got the leather bars, things like that. If the whole community could just work together.
Well, I think as a community, the landscape has changed enormously. I think the last time we came together as a community was during the AIDS crisis, where even the gays and the lesbians got on amazingly. Like, because the lesbians were amazing and nursed us, you know, and that was an amazing point, because before then they'd been divided, you know, and that was a unifying point. And, you know, when there's political reasons to bring the community together, there was the age of consent, there was Clause 28, all those things, we kind of come together. And now there isn't so much, you know, maybe, you know, a few people turned up today to protest about Putin, you know, but generally there isn't something that unifies all the generations of LGBT together. We're kind of all cracking on because, you know, yes, you know, there could be improvements, but generally everything's okay. So getting everyone together on this issue, you know, is going to be a difficult thing, because there are people out there who don't go out on the gay scene, who don't take drugs, who just get on with their lives, being gay, not much of an issue. They might live with a partner, and they're separate from this. And they don't understand it, and they look at it and think, what's wrong with these people? You know, there is that there as well. And I'm not saying, that those problems aren't there, but as a community and how we deal with this, it's a difficult thing. And with regards to I try and show care to my fellow person, and with regards to going out clubbing and people who take GHB, it's a difficult thing if you nurse someone who's passed out on GHB. Which could take a couple of hours, and it's quite a frightening experience, and it takes quite a lot of monitoring. When they come round, and I have done this a lot, I'm sad to say, they are the most ungrateful people you have ever come across in your life. It's this bizarre thing where, because they have no memory and they suddenly wake up in party mode, they literally, you might have been in a hospital with them, moving their tongue around so they don't choke on it, getting their eyeballs, keeping them awake, doing that for hours, and they sit up and just go, and they just go off to the nearest party. and you'll be hanging on to their hem going, but I nursed you. And they're like, just, you're bringing me down. And they go off. And this is consistent with every single person I have nursed with GHB. And this is friends. This is people I know. This is strangers that I've seen, like lying on the floor and you nurse them. And that, you know, you may have a sense of community. But that's one thing that can really kind of destroy your sense of community. And eventually you feel you're making a choice to do this. Well, why are you doing this? Why would you put yourself in a situation where you may be a burden to others? You know, I always feel about GHB, if you're going to take those risks and take that drug, do it at home. You know, and that is a dangerous thing in itself because there might not be medics there. But to go out in public and take something that could leave you very vulnerable and expecting other people to nurse you, it's a bizarre and kind of selfish thing to do.
I think the most annoying thing for me is having to deal with people on G, especially from the grassy knoll, is the amount of times I've seen people partying there on a Saturday morning, Saturday late afternoon, Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. We're the ones that pick them up and call an ambulance. And the most annoying thing is that all of a sudden they're flat out. We're waiting on an ambulance coming, and all those 10 people that were round about them, not my friend, no, he's not mine, no, don't know who he is. But yet, you've been sitting with them for 3 hours. You've been clubbing with them the night before. As soon as an ambulance is called, people just disappear, trying to get information out. What have they taken so we can give that information onto the ambulance? Don't know, not my friend.
Well, I hope this time around it will be different. And from my own experience of having lived in Sydney for 8 years in the 90s and done absolutely everything there is to do in every way there is to do it, 9 years over here not doing anything much at all, and coming back to things in a way where, yeah, I want to keep down my day job, and I'm doing things with a whole different level of awareness. Is what did I do in those 9 years? Well, it was actually, in my terms, a lot of personal development. It was spirituality. It was a whole load of things to actually get me to a level where I can cope with all of this. And, you know, I know Darren Brady is in the audience who runs something called Quest. And it's all of this kind of work which goes to the core of, I know this is Matthew's theme as well, with the Velvet Rage, which is, you know, why are gay men so susceptible to all of this? And it actually, I think the new way forward has got to come from the type of work that Darren is doing, which is how do we create strong individuals that can cope with the world that we're in? Obviously, from an early age, if they're getting sort of offered, you know, slamming within 8 ticks or whatever it is, you know, age 15. I mean, it just seems, you know, we've got to somehow find the mechanisms to educate our own people.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I agree with you. Let's just come to this young gent down here with the red vest on. Did you want to ask a question? And then we'll go to the guy in the blue T-shirt that's been waiting very patiently at the back over there, and then we'll answer these 2 questions. So this guy here in the red first. We've only got about 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes left. So.
Okay. Yeah, well, obviously we're talking about Vauxhall here, but if we're talking about a cultural problem within the gay community, I think the other side of the coin is Soho. And in Soho, you will find a lot of people who wouldn't set foot in Vauxhall, who wouldn't touch drugs. But equally, you don't find a particularly accepting community there, I don't think. And I think it can be very judgmental and very artificial. Like, I was in a bar waiting, and I say that having worked in Soho and going out in Soho a lot. And I was in a bar waiting for half an hour for a friend the other day, having a pint. And I saw some people I knew in the crowd, but they wouldn't come up and say hello because we don't have that kind of just essential idea of friendship, you know, of acquaintanceship anymore. And so I think some people might go to Vauxhall in search, because you don't have that judgmental thing, because everyone's on drugs, so, you know, like, everyone does accept you, but then, of course, you know, you become reduced to the level of just your penis after a while.
Is it Patrick?
Yeah, it is.
I'm glad I knew.
Okay.
Not just a penis. Thank you. Do you specifically have a question, or just a statement?
Yeah, well, so basically, what do you think about that, of culturally, these 2 things, like, being possibly part and parcel of their...
Good point, I agree. Would you just take the guy right at the back over there with the blue T-shirt on, just because he's been waiting very patiently, and then we'll take this gentleman and this gentleman here. after we've answered the question.
It's really not worth the wait.
I'm sure it is.
Matthew, you were saying about do we have a problem in the community as the gay community? And I think to go right back down to basic, and actually Stuart earlier was saying about kind of being in a situation where you don't want to be seen to be the party pooper, so you take those more subversive behaviours, you take those on and you decide to go that way. I think to bring things right down to a very basic level, even with all the successes we've had in equality over the last 20, 30, 40 years, it still stands that when you're brought up as a child, you're exposed to, you're going to grow up, you're going to have a husband or a wife, you're going to get kids, and through no kind of homophobia, but from school, Cinderella and Prince Charming, and that's what you're exposed to. And of course, most of us, as we grow up, we realise, wait a minute, that's not what I want. Am I a freak? Am I different? What's going on? And then you kind of go through your teen years or your 20s or however long. Once you come out, you realise, I'm able to subvert everything I've been told is, not told is wrong, but subvert those things that I've been told are how I'm meant to be. I'm going to come out, I'm going to be gay, I'm going to be, a homosexual person. If I can subvert those, and it's fine, maybe that's kind of why gay guys, have that cliche of being more promiscuous, because, well, I'm not going to settle down, I'm not going to have a wife and children, I'm going to have loads of sex, because that could be okay too. I may also go out and take loads of drugs, because that's subverting what I've been told is kind of quote-unquote sensible behaviour. So maybe if, and you kind of see these things, I mean, Ellen 100 years ago did an episode where her friends, where gay was the norm, and her friends had to come out as straight. Maybe if that was the case, we wouldn't feel the need to be so theatrical and perform and take loads of drugs and be very promiscuous, so it's kind of a bullshit undergraduate psych theory.
No, I think it's common sense. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think you just take this gentleman just here. Oh, the one behind you, then we'll come to this guy here. Hello.
Hi. Oh, God, dear me. Yes, I wanted to know if... I'll keep it a bit closer. Okay. If all these stories that you've shared with me tonight, all your horror stories and so on, and all the fun and all the jokes about it, and the typical gay humour that comes through out of those horrific situations, are these being published? I mean, you talked about all these drug disasters with people mixing their different drugs and things. Is that information out there in the gay media week after week after week? Because that's what people want to know who are taking these drugs, what to do and what not to do. What are the protocols of drug taking, first of all? And what is stopping you from doing that, I think, is a cultural thing.
Thank you.
And I think you've got to work and to do that. And the gentleman over there who was talking about the gay community should come together. Well, yes, it should, but it keeps being taken away from us. The last opportunity we had in order to raise money to do this kind of social work within the gay community was taken away from us last year when the Gay Pride Committee collapsed. And this so-and-so from Downing Street has formed a CIC, that's a company, charity interest company, under which there's no obligation for them to pay out any money to anybody at all. They can if they like, but they don't have to.
There's a problem.
And we have to wait and see how that goes. Well, because there must be a lot of professionalism in organising gay pride, so it does need money. But I think it's about time not only the pubs and clubs, but gay pride itself started providing money for the community for social work, because after all, they're profiting out of everybody, and it's time for them to pay some back.
I think
they've gone to gay pride year after year after year, and they've never contributed any money to gay pride at all, but they're there to make the money by selling the beer. This is all cultural things that need to be detailed. Okay,
I actually think that is part of the answer, actually, not just bars and clubs, but let's go to this gent here. Thank you for your point, I appreciate it.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for the panel for coming here. I've enjoyed it. It's been very educational and informative. I have 5 extreme learning and speech disabilities, so you need to bear with me. I do have a question. I try not to rant. I can't construct my sentences, so just bear with me. I was told once when I was talking to someone working in Vauxhall that I know as a acquaintance, and he was telling me that because of there's so many drug problems, which I didn't know anything about, I didn't think it was that bad, but he told me it was pretty serious, especially during the weekends, that all the embassies are now moving to Vauxhall, and the American embassies moving to Vauxhall, and apparently they have demanded the closure of all the gay clubs. Now, this is what I was told, but I've noticed when, unlike 95 or 98% of the gay community population, I do read the gay press. I haven't actually read anything about it. Not that I flick through it for the good-looking white guys who pounce and have six-packs, and there's no black guys or bears or Muslim or Indian guys. But thank you.
Question.
But I mean, that's my point. Sorry, yes. Are we self-destructing ourselves, and is this going to be, in the words of Adele, the end of the gay community in Vauxhall? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've not heard that. I don't know if that's true. I've not heard that, but we would talk about that. I don't know if Paul's heard about the Vauxhall clubs being shut down by the Americans. Boo hiss. The point that Patrick made about the gay community, I mean, it's really interesting because, we all often we have these kind of, meetings that people go to and you hear people saying, oh, the gay community is no community anymore, we're all nasty to each other. But the thing is, that's us. That's me, that's you, that's all of us. What is the gay community? It's us being negative to each other, and us being shy, maybe a bit bitchy, maybe a bit unpleasant to each other and judging each other and all the rest of it. And I do think we need a root and branch, to coin a new Labour phrase, kind of look at where we're at and how we can be nice to each other. And I do think there's a lot of weight to put on bars and clubs. Everyone talks about the scene being difficult, and I have problems with it. I have problems with some of the things that go in the magazines. That's a whole other discussion. But it's a lot of weight to put on bars and clubs to expect everyone to live.
Well, it's also an assumption that just because you're gay, that you're going to get on with another gay. If you have a gay, very right-wing Tory and a gay socialist and a feminist lesbian, just because they're all gay doesn't mean they're going to get on. They might do. I'd love it. Sometimes they do. But this is the issue. When we had unifying things that brought us all together, we're able to act as a community. But right now, people are just being gay, and then they have other things. It's not just about being gay. People are kind of focusing on the other parts of them. So to come together as a community is a harder thing. Because if all you have in common is you sleep with someone with the same sex, that doesn't mean you're going to come together on all the other issues.
I do take that point, but I have hope that what we do actually have, and all across the world, is we have that shared experience of growing up with oppression, with people saying, be straight, do this, do that, play with toys, da-da-da-da-da. And then we have the experience of going out into the gay scene. I would hope we can find some compassion for one another through having that.
I hope so too.
Experience.
I'm just saying it's difficult.
Yeah.
I would like that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we need to talk about that and focus on that. And I think commercial gay magazines, I mean, I do try and talk about an attitude, actually, and we do have a couple's page, and we've got a page now for older guys. I took all the clubbing coverage out. We've got rid of all the porn ads, which I am pleased about, but Attitude's just one magazine, and even to blame the bars and clubs or to blame all the other magazines, it's not as simple as that.
And I also, the gentleman here who talked about providing information and a kind of service, I was behind an initiative that was called Drug Idol, and it was kind of a roadshow that went to all the clubs, and we had a panel of people. We had the Poisons Unit from St Thomas's, we had the police there, we had social workers, we had safe sex workers, David Stewart was a guest at times, and we had a panel of people, and we gave out information. We also offered a forum where people could ask questions without worrying about the consequences, i.e. you could ask the police about how much you can possess a certain amount of drug without getting busted, and if you're caught in such a situation, will you go to prison, and all that kind of stuff, without having to worry about being judged. And initially, it was quite successful. A few people came along, and I hosted this event, so I know about it. And we went to different venues around Vauxhall, and it was inspired by the number of deaths that had occurred through GHB. And that came together. All the bar owners got together with the police and everyone else, and I kind of developed this initiative called Drug Idol. But eventually, nobody came. And it was a weird thing. The people that came who were interested weren't people with drug problems. They were people who were interested in doing things culturally, going out on a Wednesday night, thought this would be quite interesting. But the people who, you know, I was in drag as well, that was a sight. But that was, I hosted it. But the people who should have been there gleaning that information had the windows shut. It was a Wednesday night, it was a Tuesday night, it was they're not interested. They feel like they know already, they feel invincible. So I had a bunch of worthy people there. Maybe there were a few people there who learned something, but it was a bunch of worthy people who felt like educating themselves. So it is there, but people don't always suck it up.
Jason, yeah.
I think, Stuart, we spoke about this, about the drug idol thing, was the fact that I think a lot of the younger people actually going into a gay venue with the police there, doctors there, bar managers been there, sort of asking these questions. How many mLs of G could I really take in one night? I think that might have been one of the areas where it fell flat on. Where if it was maybe in a community centre and then there maybe wasn't the police in uniform or things like that, it might be something to take into the future again, and rather than being in a club venue.
I think that's the problem, that the kids don't want to talk about drugs; they just want to take them, don't they? I would say, David. What are your thoughts on community cohesion and the future? We need to wrap up very quickly, very shortly.
30 years ago, when someone was dying of AIDS in a bed, somebody who never knew him on the other side of town would leave the club or get out of their armchair and go and march on the streets for that person to have the right to care and well-being. Now, when someone dies in a sauna from G, a gay man goes in the Guardian or the News of the World and calls him a junkie. We're not getting out of our beds and caring about each other. That's, I think, what's missing. We need a new crisis. For so far as I'm concerned, what we're experiencing now, this sex, this drugs involved, that's a crisis, and it hopefully will bring us together if we do it right.
Well, it is being talked about more. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we will all find out very, very shortly. I just want to say a couple of words before we finish. We haven't got time for any more questions. I'm really sorry, because we're going to be told off. Sorry, or statements, I'm afraid. Sorry. Dominic from Pink Therapy is here. Look up Pink Therapy, isn't it? Yes, look up Pink Therapy. I think all these things about underlying mental health problems, because we get treated like shit from day one, not being a victim about it, but there's a lot of shit we have to go through. I know I've gone through my own. I'm a bit crazy sometimes. Dominic is brilliant. He's really, really helpful. There's lots of other helpful people. The Quest was been mentioned tonight for gay men. The Velvet Rage is a book which I know some people love, some people don't love so much, but it's worth looking. There's an RVT event in November that lovely Michael Peacock is doing in November. Go on, quickly say it.
21st of November.
The mic.
Oh, grab the mic, yeah.
21st of November, young Peter's going to be on the panel, and another young lad, very well informed, sorry about the arse in your face, Alex Palumbo. There was so much enthusiasm from the first event that I hosted, and I'm really encouraged. I think it's fantastic that this event has taken place tonight. And believe you me, people that came to the first event, there was people there that are real. It's going to be called the Real and Present Danger to Our Community. So it's not just GBL, GHB focused. It's going to be an amazing night. There's going to be visuals and films. Jerry Potter's going to do some performance pieces. Please come, 21st of November.
The last one was really good, I have to say. It was really, really good. So well done. Come to that in November. There are also various groups. If you have a problem with crystal meth, there is a new group, which a really lovely, amazing young gay guy has started, Crystal Meth Addicts Anonymous, and it's a 12-step based program. The guy is great. Lots of us here in this room have experience of 12-step groups, including myself, and I have found them to be massively gay-friendly. There are gay AA groups every single night of the week in London. There's gay NA groups, Narcotics Anonymous, and there's also Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, which are very, very friendly to the gays. I haven't been to that one. Honest. And there's a gay one on a Thursday night, which Upper 6 in Euston, behind Goode Street. It's fantastic. So there is... What was that? What was your thing? Gallup. Go to Gallup. Gallup is fantastic. So there is hope, and I think there's a growing movement of people talking about this. I wrote about an attitude. I did talk about it. Thank you. And there's lots of other people talking about it, and there is an awareness about it. So it can be bleak. There's lots of bad things happening. We didn't actually talk about the deaths in saunas and the high level of suicides. Have a lovely Saturday evening. But that's for another day. But there is hope. There is hope. There is hope. And it's brilliant that Dickie has put this on tonight. So thanks very much. Thank you to Stuart Hill. to Jason Dickie, to David Stewart, and I'm Matthew Todd. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening. Thank you.